Nadia packed one bag. Not in anger, not in tears. She folded each piece of clothing the way her mother had taught her. Neat, deliberate, corners matching corners. The room was quiet. Outside, the palace slept. Inside, she moved like someone who had already made peace with a hard thing. The bond hummed in her chest the whole time. She knew it would. It always did. That deep, steady pull that lived somewhere between her ribs. The feeling her people called the mark of a true mate. She had felt it the first time Damien looked at her across a crowded hall 3 years ago. She had felt it every day since. She still felt it now, as she closed the bag and walked to the door without looking back. She had loved him. That was the honest truth, and she carried it with her the way you carry something heavy but necessary. She had loved the version of Damien who used to sit beside her at the window after a long day and say nothing, because he knew silence could be a comfort. She had loved the man who brought her wildflowers once, not arranged, not delivered by a servant, just picked from a hillside with his own hands, a little bent, slightly wrong, entirely real. But she had also watched that same man talk over her in meetings with his council. She had watched him receive her grief with the calm, distant expression of someone filing paperwork. She had heard him say, more than once, "You are my mate, Nadia. That is not in question," as though the bond itself was enough, as though love could run on recognition alone, without water, without sunlight, without tending. She was the daughter of a woman who had stayed too long in a house that didn't hold her carefully enough. She had promised herself, quietly, years before she ever met Damien, that she would not repeat that story. So she left. 3 kingdoms stood between Emran and the palace she walked out of that morning. She crossed the first border before sunrise, when the road was empty, and the air was cold, and the sky was the color of something trying to decide whether to become day. She did not write a letter. There was nothing she could say in writing that she hadn't already said out loud, calmly and clearly, over the course of months. He had listened. She believed that. She also believed listening and hearing were 2 very different things, and he had only ever fully mastered the first. The bond stretched behind her like wire. It didn't break. She hadn't expected it to. She kept walking. Damien woke to an empty room and understood immediately. He stood very still in the middle of the floor for a long moment, the way a man stands when the ground has shifted, and he is calculating whether it will shift again. Then he called for his advisors. Then for his best riders. Then, when neither of those felt sufficient, he sat down alone, and was quiet in a way he hadn't been since childhood. He sent a courier that afternoon. The courier came back empty-handed. She had already moved on. He sent 2 more. Then a formal letter, carefully worded, measured, carrying the full weight of his name and his position and his very sincere apologies. He reread it before sealing it, and felt, for the first time, the particular discomfort of seeing yourself accurately in something you've written. She did not respond. The silence came back to him like a mirror held up at close range. He left without his entourage on a Tuesday. Just a horse, a pack, and the kind of quiet pride that takes up less space than the loud kind, but is harder to put down. The first kingdom he entered was Vassar, where the roads were wide and the people were practical, and nobody cared about alpha bloodlines or the politics of who mated with whom. He asked at every inn, every market stall, every roadside stop. Most people shook their heads. One old woman at a bread stall squinted at him and said, "A girl came through here, quiet, careful, paid for her bread, and thanked me by name, even though I never told her my name." She paused. She seemed like someone who was used to noticing people. He stood there with his coin in his hand. "She went west," the old woman said, "about 2 weeks ago." He thanked her and kept moving. But that detail, "she thanked me by name," stayed with him the whole ride. He found himself trying to remember the last time he had asked a servant their name. He couldn't. The second kingdom was Aldrin, smaller and quieter, tucked between 2 mountain ranges like something the world had forgotten to develop. He arrived cold and tired, and without any of the usual certainty that preceded him everywhere he went. He found a room at an inn and paid for it himself, which sounds simple but felt, to him, surprisingly strange. He heard about her from a healer in the market square who had shared a table with her one afternoon. She asked good questions, the healer said, stirring her tea. Not the kind people ask to seem interested. The real kind. The kind that takes something out of you to answer. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. Are you looking for her because you need her, or because you miss her? He opened his mouth. The healer waited. Both, he finally said. And I'm starting to understand those aren't the same thing. She nodded slowly. She went toward the coast. The third crossing almost finished him. A mountain pass, the kind that looked manageable on a map, and revealed its full character only once you were already inside it. 3 days in, his horse threw a shoe, and the temperature dropped, and he made camp in a hollow with wet wood that refused to fully catch. He spent 2 days with a fever that made the world soft at the edges. He had been sick before, of course, but always with someone nearby, always with the machinery of his position, servants, physicians, the careful attention of people whose job it was to ensure his comfort and recovery. Here there was no one. He lay in a cold camp under a gray sky, and the bond in his chest pulled steadily westward, and he thought about Nadia doing this alone. Not a mountain pass necessarily, but all the quiet versions of this, the moments of difficulty with no one nearby to witness them, because he had been physically present but not truly available. The bond was supposed to mean she was never alone. He understood now that presence and availability were also two very different things. He recovered, slowly. He fed the horse, adjusted the shoe as best he could, and came down the western side of the mountain on the 4th morning, leaner and quieter, and without several things he had carried up, the comfortable feeling that he was, fundamentally, a good man, doing his best. That was the fever's real work. Emren was a coastal city, salt-aired and busy, the kind of place where people minded their own lives with great efficiency. He found her on his 3rd day there. She was working at a small healing practice near the eastern harbor. He saw her through the window first, her back to him, talking with an elderly patient, her hands demonstrating something with careful, patient gestures. He stood outside for a long time, long enough that a child on the street asked him if he was lost. Yes, he said honestly, but I think I'm in the right place. He went in. She turned when the door opened. Her expression didn't change, not in the way of someone hiding a reaction, but in the way of someone who had already prepared for this possibility and had decided in advance how they wanted to meet it. Calmly, on her own terms. Damien, she said. Nadia, he said. She finished with her patient. She walked him to a small room at the back and sat across from him at a plain wooden table and said, "Go ahead." He had prepared for this. He had ridden through 3 kingdoms preparing for this. He said everything he had understood since she left, about the council meetings, about the distance he had kept without knowing he was keeping it, about the way he had treated the bond as an answer rather than a beginning. He said it plainly, without deflection, without the impressive vocabulary he usually reached for when honesty felt too exposed. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You learned to say what I needed to hear." She folded her hands on the table. "I need to see what you do when I don't respond the way you expect." He looked at her. He nodded. He didn't beg. He didn't argue. He found a room on the other side of the city, a small room over a carpenter's workshop, and he paid for it by the week. He found work with a man who built and repaired fishing boats along the lower harbor, a broad, patient man named Corso, who did not know what an alpha was, had no interest in bloodlines, and cared only whether you showed up on time and did the work, without making unnecessary noise about it. Damien showed up on time. He did the work. He was bad at it, at first. His hands weren't built for it, and Corso said so plainly and without cruelty, which Damien found both humbling and useful. He got better, slowly. His hands developed calluses in new places. He started waking up tired in a different way, the honest tired of physical labor, which felt nothing like the performing tired of administrative authority. He saw Nadia once in the market, on his 9th day in Emren. She was buying vegetables. He was buying bread. They were 20 feet apart. She looked up and saw him. He raised a hand, not beckoning, just acknowledging. She gave one small nod and went back to her shopping. He went back to his bread. He did not follow her. He did not find a reason to walk in her direction. He bought the bread and went home and sat on the step outside his room and listened to the harbor sounds and let the evening pass without trying to make it into something. This, he was learning, was harder than any kingdom he had crossed. She came to him on a Saturday evening, 3 weeks after his arrival. He was sitting outside with a cup of tea, watching the street, when she appeared at the far end of it and walked toward him with the straightforward manner of someone who had made a decision and was not interested in drawing out the approach. She sat down on the step beside him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "How are your hands?" she finally asked, nodding toward the calluses. "Different," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Not the way you look at someone you're trying to figure out. The way you look at someone you've already figured out and are now deciding what to do with the answer." "Are you different?" she said. "Or do you just look different?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet," he said. "I think both, but I can't be sure from the inside. That's the honest answer." He looked at her. "I'm not leaving until we both find out." She was quiet for a long time. The bond hummed between them, the same as it had always been. That steady, familiar pull. But something had shifted in the space around it. Before, it had felt like a given, like weather, like something that simply existed regardless of what either of them did. Now it felt like something that needed both of them to face each other for it to mean what it was supposed to mean. She turned and looked at the harbor. The light was going orange and low, catching the water in long, flat pieces. "I'm not ready to go back," she said. "I know," he said. "And I'm not ready to call this fixed." "I know that too." She was quiet again. Then, "There's a meal on Sundays at the community hall 2 streets over. People bring food, sit together. It's not formal." She paused. "I was planning to go tomorrow." He waited. "You could come," she said, "if you wanted." He looked at her. "I want to," he said. They went to the Sunday meal. They sat beside each other without touching. They talked with the people at the table, a retired fisherman, a woman who made linen, a young couple with a baby who passed the child back and forth with the easy, practiced rhythm of 2 people who had learned to share without keeping score. Damien watched them without meaning to. Nadia noticed him watching. On the walk home, she said, "What were you thinking about, with that couple?" "I was thinking it looked easy," he said. "And then I was thinking it probably took years to look that easy." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "That's right." They stopped at the corner where their roads diverged, his to the harbor side, hers toward the healing practice. The evening was cool, and the street lamps were coming on one by one down the length of the road. "Same time next Sunday?" he asked. She considered it for exactly the right amount of time, not too fast, not performing hesitation. "Same time," she said, and she walked home. That was how it started again. Not with a declaration. Not with a ceremony or a return or a grand reunion in the great hall of his palace with everyone watching. Just Sundays. Then a walk on a Wednesday. Then a conversation that lasted past midnight on a bench near the water, the kind where neither person checks the time because neither person wants the excuse to leave. He did not stop working with Corso. She did not stop her practice. They built something in the gaps between their separate lives, carefully, argued over, renegotiated every few weeks when one of them moved too fast or too far in the old direction. It was smaller than anything his position had ever offered him. It was larger than anything he had ever actually had. And she, who had packed a single bag and walked out before sunrise into a world with no guarantee of what came next, she had known, somewhere in the part of her that did not lie to herself, that this was the only version of the story worth living. Not the one where she stayed and shrunk. Not the one where he chased and captured. The one where she left and he followed, and they both arrived somewhere neither of them had been before. That was the real thing. That was what it had taken to get there.